This meeting is now being recorded.
Oh, well, good. That was after.
He was asking for a definition of narrative objectives.
The narrative objectives in the basin plans are going to remain. So I don't believe...
He was asking for the definition of narrative objectives.
I mean, I think the definition...
Oh. So a narrative objective is just a water quality objective that's just a word. So, for example, no toxic in toxic amounts is a narrative water quality objective, or the numeric water quality objective is like no more than 32 milligrams per liter.
Is there an example for the bacteria?
Yeah, I don't know. Karen, do you know what the narrative bacteria water quality objective is?
So I know that there's some narrative ones for, say, Lake Tahoe, and I don't know exactly where else, but pretty much the numeric ones are ones that are just, numbers or in tables or something like that, and the narrative ones tend to be more specific or for areas where it's harder to just nail down one specific number. But again, you can email me if you need help finding a better answer than that, and I'll do my best to help you find that answer. It tends to be pretty obvious when you read through the basin plans if, this is a narrative requirement as opposed to numeric.
Hey, if I could, from phone?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, go for it.
Jim Hausner here. There were two things. One, you talked about how the state of California is those both total and fecal, and perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on that. And then the other concerns birds. A lot of the harbors and others have had issues in the past with bird issues, which have caused cleanup and further testing and that sort of stuff. Are we moving away from some of that with this new protocol?
So I think that the focusing on the human health risk as opposed to fecal indicator bacteria concentration will help to separate out bird fecal matter versus human fecal matter, as opposed to when it was just the concentration and it didn't matter what the source was. So I think that will kind of address that issue. Sorry, what was the first question?
You made a comment about California being the only state that does has both a total and a fecal.
Oh, that is just from when this was originally put in place so long ago, and I honestly don't know the story behind that. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
I had a couple of questions. This is Paul Meckler from Port of San Diego. I thought I heard you say, Karen, and I may have misheard you, that you were not planning on revising the ISWEBI standards?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the ISWEBI provisions that we posted in January, those are the proposed changes that we are sticking with. So we will be updating it, but just from the posting in January, that is what we're updating it to. We're not looking at those any further. The only ones that we're looking at further from January to now is the ocean water provisions.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Sorry, yeah.
And then I was just curious as far as how is anything changing as far as human health risk assessment is defined, or is that still kind of the epidemiological approach?
I believe, it's still the epidemiological approach, and that's what we're using for reference material for pulling this information, yeah.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions? No? Thank you, Karen. That was very helpful. Yes. Oh, we're doing okay on time. I think we're going to do one more presentation before we take a break. This is going to be for half an hour. This is going to be from John Griffith at Squirt to talk about determining QMRA eligibility at urban beaches. Hi, John. Are you on the line?
I'm on the line.
Awesome. Do you want? I think it would be just so that we don't have any more hiccups. I think we're going to have you say when you want us to change the slide. That way we could just get going
That would be
on
fine.
the presentation. Okay.
we go.
I'm ready, Mike.
Okay, good.
Okay. So what I'm going to talk about today is actually speaks to some of the stuff Karen was actually talking about, so it's a good setup. And in particular, QMRA is a way to establish site-specific objectives. For example, when your source might be only birds. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to start out with some definitions. You already know fecal indicator bacteria. Some of you might not be so familiar with the human fecal markers that we use. These have been developed over the last 20 years or so, but the technology is now mature and we're able to measure certain bacteria that are very closely associated with human waste. And they're not completely specific to human waste, right? Because if you have dogs, you know dogs will drink out of the toilet, dogs eat diapers, right? So sometimes these bacteria will be in low levels in things like your dogs and sometimes in animals like possums. But in general, when we see them consistently and we see them in high numbers, they're a very good indicator that you have human waste there. And then you're probably all familiar with Tmdls too, but I thought I would put those up because they go to why you might want to establish a site-specific objective. Your Tmdls are based on the fecal indicator bacteria exceedances you have, and if you have too many, you get on the 303D list. It turns out that there is a way in a lot of the basin plans, and also now that EPA's released its criteria, that there's a possibility of actually adjusting the allowable amount of fecal indicator bacteria if it's not human. Next slide, please. Next slide. There we go. Okay. So QMRA, or Quantitative Microbial Risk Assessments, basically a modeling approach to quantify health risk from microbial pathogens. It's been used in drinking water for a long time, but it's also used in setting allowable limits for chemistry. And so EPA's actually included QMRA as a way to revise numerical standards for Enterococcus and also actually for E. coli at freshwater beaches. And it basically assumes that, the current criteria assume that the health risk is from exposure to treated wastewater. And that's because when EPA did their EPI studies, those are the beaches they picked, right? They picked beaches where the health risk was going to be assumed to be the worst. And therefore, any other beach would be overprotected. And so when they did their epidemiology studies, they went to beaches typically that had a treated wastewater plume. And so QMRA would be based on exposure with site-specific pathogen loads. There have been no QMRA studies at marine beaches before the case study I'm going to talk about. We actually have done a QMRA now as part of a surfer health study in San Diego, but at this point there's been no adjustment to the criteria at that particular beach for lots of reasons. But part of it is that what we found was that the risk was of swimming or of surfing after a rainstorm was somewhat lower than swimming in sewage at the beaches EPA studied, but still it's difficult to set a standard that is less protective, and I think folks are wrestling with that still right now. So next slide, please. So when might you consider a QMRA? Well, The first one is you need a beach that has chronic exceedances. And next step is you need to verify that you don't have any sources of human fecal contamination and an obvious or suspected source of non-human contamination. Next slide, please. So, the first thing you need to do is identify the major sources of the indicator bacteria of the beach. And for some beaches, it's pretty obvious. It might be gulls, for example. Then you need to look at the historical data. You need to look at any BMPs that have been put in place, sewer rehabilitation. So you really do a complete, kind of a modified sanitary survey, if you will, of the beach. And so you're collecting direct observations, you're talking to the folks that manage the beach, the folks that manage the wastewater infrastructure near the beach, and then you need to go and collect data at the beach for both indicator bacteria and also catch bacteria on filters for molecular analysis for the human marker. And then you verify this by measuring the human marker, or you can actually look at microbial community analysis. Using this data, you verify that there's little or no human sources of contamination present. And that's through this testing of human markers. And then you also need to measure the pathogen load in the source of contamination to the beach. So if this were seagulls, we'd collect seagull poop and we'd measure the pathogen load there and also figure out how many seagulls are there, how much of this pathogen essentially per poop, right, and figure out loading to the beach of these pathogens. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about Hobie and Kitty Beach, and these are beaches that are inside Ventura Harbor, and there essentially were beaches that were built to dissipate wave action, but they're also beaches that have, because of this, being inside the harbor and little wave action, they also have relatively poor circulation. And as many of you may note, beaches that are called Kitty Beach or Mother's Beach or Baby Beach often have poor circulation, often have birds, and often have exceedances of FIV. So next slide, please. So there were several possible sources here, and I ought to also say that there's been a whole lot of remediation done at this beach. So the sanitary lines to the restrooms had been replaced, and there had been a large project to divert stormwater. So in dry weather, and this was all in dry weather, I might add. In dry weather, all the urban runoff from the neighborhood surrounding is captured and pumped to the sanitary sewer. But there are still some sources. So in the top left, there are groins that border this beach, and you can see up on the groins there are lots of cormorants and other birds, and all that white stuff is bird poop. So the birds are definitely a possible source. On the right top, you see there's a storm drain. This storm drain only drains 2 curb drains up on the street, which is about 10 feet above where the beach is, and those are generally dry during dry weather. On the bottom left, you can see there's a Coast Guard cutter on the other side of that groin, so there's a Coast Guard station right there. It has its own infrastructure. And then on the bottom right, there's a bathroom that's actually located on the beach. That's the one that's the lines were replaced. So next slide, please. So here's our sampling scheme. So we sampled Hobie Beach is on the top, and then there's a groin, and so sites 4 through 8 are at Kitty Beach. And these beaches we sampled every day. At 8 in the morning between Memorial Day and Labor Day. So we ended up with many samples, and we measured indicator bacteria, and we also measured human markers. And so you can see we had relatively good coverage, and I might point out that the compliant sites for these beaches are Site 3 and Site 6. Okay, next slide, please. And so we definitely did find Enterococcus, but you can see that the number of exceedances were relatively low, and except for Site 1. And Site 1 was in front of that storm drain that you see coming out. And the other thing that we found was not much human marker there. So the Enterococcus at that particular place wasn't really associated with human contamination. What we did find is there is a vault that the drain drains into back on the sidewalk, and that vault is full of debris, especially kelp that gets pushed up there in high tide. And so when we popped the lid on that and sampled in there, it was just full of FIB. And so what was happening was, as the tide went in and out, it flushes this drain, and that bacteria was running out on the beach. And so we were able to determine that was likely the big source of FIB at that beach. So the Enterococcus story is relatively good. Site 2, you can see we had some exceedances, but we think that's a bleed over from Site 1. Site 5 was right in front of the bathroom. It turns out that that's actually where the birds hang out. So we also had somewhat of an explanation there. Next slide, please. Then the bad news. The bad news was we had human fecal marker hits in abundance all along the beach. And in fact, some of the highest points were right in front of the compliant site. So the red is the HF183. That is the most common marker, but we also ran another marker that EPA had developed, which isn't quite as sensitive, and it corroborated our results. But you can see it's much less sensitive. So next slide, please. So back to proceeding with caution. You can see that we got to the second step, and it turns out that we actually did have human contamination, and we were actually wondering what was going on. And so we met with our advisory committee, and we actually had a second visitor show up, and that visitor was hold on, my screen just cut out. I didn't touch my mouse. You guys are too efficient. All right. All right. So our second visitor was from our unexpected visitor was from the agency that manages the local collection system. And it turns out that on the street above that beach was a pressurized main. And that pressurized main had been due to be replaced for over 15 years, but they hadn't been able to find the money to do it. And so we suspected that was where our human marker was coming from, was through the groundwater to the beach. And so even though we talked to the local health department, and we talked to the Coast Guard, and we talked to the Navy base there in the city of Oxnard, this one little special district was responsible just for the collection aid in that area, and it turned out that it was their infrastructure that was a likely culprit. Okay, next slide, please. So, what happened? Well, the QMRA actually got suspended, but the pipe was then replaced, and it turned out that the dry weather is either close to or in compliance with the TMDL. However, just like with most of your beaches, the wet weather is still out of compliance. Next slide, please. So what's happening now is we're actually assisting Ventura County with a wet weather source identification study. In fact, I had folks up there this morning collecting samples. And we're looking at two hypotheses. The first one is basically the storm runoff and groundwater from the local storm drains, which are not diverted during the winter, are contaminating the beach. And the second one is that the contamination is coming to the beach from the harbor. So we're actually sampling on the beach now and also sampling in a picket line across the mouths of those beaches to look at the concentration gradient. And so maybe, you know, at a future meeting, Michael will have me back and I can tell you what we found. But I guess the take-home message here is QMRAs are difficult to do because you have to get by that human hurdle, and especially at places with a lot of infrastructure, there can be things that you don't know about even though you try to do due diligence that can stymie you. And next slide, please. And then I'll take any questions you guys have.
This is Greg Shamko speaking. There's a power plant at Ventura that's been operating with pumps that's been cleaning the water for circulation for many years. NRG now owns the facility, and they're actually considering shutting those pumps down. And I'm wondering if during the analysis period you guys took into consideration that those pumps may have been on or off, you know, or going forward, what impact do you think that might have on this type of analysis?
Whether the pumps were on or off during the dry weather study?
Yeah, and going forward, for that matter, because...
yeah, the pumps were on during the dry weather study. So, and you know, we were working with, you know, the public works folks. So, yeah, the pumps were on during the dry weather study. They aren't on now, and I don't think they could capture this volume of you know, the wet weather volume and divert it. And what we've seen with the FIB so far is, of course, with the rain, the beach is quite contaminated, but we don't have enough data yet to look. But to look at it and make an assessment whether we think the contamination is coming from, you know, the local storm drains or from the harbor onto the shore at this point.
Thank you.
I have a question. This is Michael from LA County. We were talking about the bacteria from birds versus the bacteria from humans. If this was a situation where the human bacteria was pretty much eliminated, would it still be a danger to swimmers?
I'm sorry, what's the question? So that the human bacteria was eliminated what?
And so it was just primarily from birds. Would the water still be dangerous to humans?
Okay. Well, so that's why you actually do the pathogen loading in the birds. So birds don't carry the human viruses that you find in sewage, which are the main thing that contaminate the water, you know, or the thing we worry about when there's sewage. The bacteria with the birds tends to be Campylobacter or Salmonella. And when we've tested our local populations, in general, the pathogenic strains of those bacteria are pretty low. So low, in fact, that you probably have to run around and catch bird poops in your mouth to actually get an infected dose. But you still have to measure them, right? So the answer is when you have a lower health risk, you can plug that into the model. And what that would do would you'd also measure the Enterococcus that are in the bird droppings, and the idea is that you could then adjust the allowable amount of Enterococcus to meet that 30 illnesses per thousand that EPA has set for the current criteria. So it's
we're starting to see a lot more sea lion in Channel Islands Harbor and even here at Marina Del Rey. Is that taken into account at all?
Well, so it's very site-specific, hence the site-specific objective. So if there are sea lions and they are a source, then we would, what you'd have to do is find out what the loading of fecal bacteria and the ratio between fecal bacteria and pathogens, if any, from that source are. So, I talked about just one source, right? But you could have birds, and you also could have marine mammals. There are folks that are developing markers for the marine mammals. We have markers for the birds. And so as this goes on, we're going to get better and better at teasing out what the sources are. But, that's part of what goes into it, And something else that can go into it is, when we did our QMRA down in San Diego, we actually treated the mouth of the San Diego River as for lack of a better word, the cloaca of the watershed, right? So we measured all the pathogens coming out of that, and that was our source. So it's all about what the sources are and what the concentration is in the water. And all those things go into the model to produce essentially a risk.
John, this is Jeannie from the State Water Board. And why can't you use QMRA for human-impacted beaches? Did I miss that? Did you talk about that at the beginning?
Well, you can, but you run the risk of it being, now, if there's very little human contamination or very dilute human contamination or more dilute like we saw in San Diego, you could end up with a lower risk. You could also end up with a higher risk, right? So it could turn out that maybe you want to set your objective to be more stringent, right? So there's a risk there, but basically if you have a lot of human contamination, you might as well use EPA standards because that's what they're based on.
Oh, okay.
So it's not no human contamination, but it can't, it's really, there's no criteria. It's really a determination of, based on the data, what do you do? At this particular beach, when we had 60% of the samples on average that had a hit on human marker, to everyone on the advisory committee, that looked like there was likely a chronic contamination problem there. And so, after that pipe was fixed, the county could have gone back and pursued a QMRA, but it looks like they're mostly in compliance for their Tmdl, for their enterococcus standard anyway. So no reason to change the objective now if they're actually meeting it. So it could have been that, part of that enterococcus was coming because of the pipe.
Hey, John, this is Rolf with AMEC. I have one question. So you had your human marker at all those stations was pretty consistent, maybe indicative of a bay-wide source. Did you have other stations?
No, we didn't see it outside the beach.
Okay. I mean, it was a question for this group because I wondered if maybe there was boaters that you could, looking for other bay-wide sources that maybe inadvertently forgot their stopcocks on their heads or something.
Yeah, no, we actually did do some sampling around the area to see if we could find human marker, and this was, pretty consistent right at the beach, and that it's consistent with it coming from groundwater.
Very good. Thank you.
I have one question. This is Paul Meck with the Port of San Diego. So if you were able to, kind of take the QMRA all the way through and, through your data, you do your risk assessment and establish, more appropriate objectives to get your 32 per, 1,000 illness rate. Under what circumstances would it, so if you, because you're going to probably doing continuous monitoring there, so under what circumstances would that no longer be applicable? Like if your site conditions change, like you stop seeing the birds, but but maybe the exceedances continued or whatever it may be. I mean, is that going to be? I know maybe that's more of a water board question, but would that be factored in at all to, downward revision once again, of the objective if you kind of saw conditions change after you completed your QMRA?
Yeah, so you're right. I think that's a policy question, but the science question is, should we be continuing to sample for human markers there to make sure that something doesn't change, right? Because if you sent, it turns out Enterococcus is a pretty good marker. It's a one-way marker of fecal contamination. And so when you have sewage, you always have it. It's possible that you could have higher levels of Enterococcus, but that would be below your new objective, and they might be from a sewage source because something changed. A pipe started leaking. There was an illicit discharge that started, something like that. So I think in the long term, from a science perspective, you would want to periodically be sampling for the human marker to make sure that you continue to have low levels of it, especially if you'd remediated a human source before you did your QMRA.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. This is Morale question from Eaton and Marbury. Do you the stand around your collection? Is that ever considered in these studies?
Sorry, I can't hear the question.
The question is, do you ever test the beach stands for bacteria?
Yes, we have, and sometimes we find them. But we usually find them at least in the areas where people are exposed, in lower or similar levels to what we're seeing in the water. So, the way to look at the beach sands and the groundwater is more to drill a monitoring well up beach from there and monitor the groundwater back and forth. What we found is, where the waves are swashing, it tends to be dilute just like we see it in the beach water.
I'm sorry, can you repeat what that question was? I couldn't hear on the phone. Thank you.
The question was, do we ever test the sand for the bacteria?
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, we do see higher levels of things like Enterococcus when there are birds on the beach, and also the bird marker in the sand, but the birds are right there depositing the poop on the beach.
Thank you, John.
Sure.
I think everybody here really appreciated that. Thank you. That was very informative. Okay. So we are running a little bit late, and we are scheduled for a 10-minute break. Let's cut it down to 5-minute break, because I think the people in here need to move around. It's kind of hot, and so maybe open a window or something. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, come back at 2:47 or so. I'm going to put the speaker on mute during that time, so we're coming back at 2:47. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is Mike Hank. We're starting back up. So now we're going to move over to Vicki Gambale from the Bay Foundation, who's here to talk to us about the new Pump Out Nav app. Yeah.
All right.
I'm really sorry. Do we have the presentation up on the remote viewers screen?
It should be up right now. Can someone tell me if they see it?
Yep.
Yeah, it is up.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Next slide. So today I'll go over what the CVA program in California is before I go ahead and dig into the Pump Out Nav app itself. Next slide. I do have some animation, so please click 3 times. So in California, there is 1,100 miles of shoreline, and the state has partnered with 2 local place-based programs to achieve its Clean Vessel Act objectives. In the north, we have the San Francisco Estuary Partnership, and they work throughout the San Francisco Bay and Sacramento Delta. And in the south, we have the Bay Foundation, and we work in all the harbors from Santa Barbara down to San Diego. Next slide. The San Francisco Estuary Partnership and the Bay Foundation are both national estuary programs established by the EPA and tasked with protecting, enhancing, and restoring the waters in our regions. We have worked as part of the CVA program in the state for over 15 years to accomplish the goals of the CVA program. And to do so, we have 2 main components, education and outreach and pump out monitoring. Next slide. So we work directly with boaters and marinas and collaborate with both public and private boating groups to to enhance our outreach capacity and provide technical support. Click once, please. To assist us in our outreach, we develop tools to amplify our messaging and make it more accessible. So here you see the Bay and Delta has developed maps of all the marinas with where all the pump out locations are and information about the Y valves. Click once, please. In the south, we have the Southern California Boaters Guide, which is similar. It has a map of each harbor with those resources, along with other resources including where fuel docks are, oil recycling, bilge pump outs, and that one acts more as a cruiser's guide and lists all the marinas that offer guest slips. Next click, please. We also have a program called Honeypot Day where we offer boaters a mobile pump out, and this introduces another convenient option to the boating community on how to manage their sewage waste in case they don't want to actually move their boat and go to a stationary pump out. Next click. Together with the California State Parks Division of Boating and Waterways and the California Coastal Commission's Boating Clean and Green program, we produce the statewide newsletter called The Changing Tide. This comes out 3 times a year, and it gives the latest information on what's going on and serves as another way for us to get our message out to the boating community and marina managers. Next click. And the newest arsenal in our toolkit is the Pump Out Nav app, which I will be going into more detail on the next slide, please. So in California, our 2 groups monitor 159 pump outs at 120 different marinas. Here in Southern California, we monitor 70 pump outs in 50 marinas, and the rest is all in the Sacramento Delta area and the San Francisco Bay. And we monitor on a quarterly basis. So 4 times a year, we go out and monitor all these units. Next slide, please. The purpose of our pump out monitoring is to ensure that the equipment is operational for boaters. There's nothing worse than getting on your boat and moving it and going to a pump out to find out that it does not work. Also, pump outs, boaters tend to think if it doesn't work once, it never works in their mind. So if they go through all that trouble and get to a unit and it's not working, they likely won't go there again for a considerable amount of time. We also do this to track the general condition and evaluate the performance of the pump out stations. We assist the facilities in meeting their grant requirements and ensuring that their equipment is operating to its peak capacity. We also, while we're out there monitoring, promote the installation and proper maintenance of pump out stations, and we let marinas know about the CVA installation and maintenance grant at DBW so that if they are not in the grant cycle, they can go back and apply for a grant if their equipment needs updating. And this also helps us maintain relationships with the marinas. Next slide, please. So when we are out monitoring, we have a very specific set of data that we are collecting, including signage. We look to make sure it has a pump out logo sign somewhere posted, instructions for how to operate the pump out, a contact number in case the unit does not work, the hours of operation. Here in Southern California, most of them are open 24 hours a day. However, there are some that are only open during their business hours. We also want to make sure they have signage for the on-off button. The cost, most of them are free, but if they do charge, they're allowed to charge up to $5 to help cover the costs of maintaining the unit. So if they do charge, we want that cost to be posted, and then funding credit as well. We also look at the condition of the parts, including the nozzle, the backflow flap, which is part of the nozzle, the sight glass, ball valve, hose, motor unit, pedestal, and on-off button. We rate all these parts on a scale of 0 to 3, 0 being that that part is missing, and 3 being that it is new and in perfect condition. We take an hour counter read-in. All of the units we monitor have an hour counter on their motor, and this is a great indication of how often that unit is used, so we could see if it's located in a great space that boaters frequent and is getting a lot of use. And this also can help show us if a unit might not be operational for a long period of time if that hour counter read-in does not change from one monitor and event to the next. We measure the vacuum. So in the top left photo, you see there is a gauge attached to the end of the nozzle, and we take a read-in from that gauge after a 1-minute adjustment period. And we measure the time it takes to pump 5 gallons of water as well. Next slide. While we're there, we take photos and leave a postcard with the Marina office. However, our new app actually will replace that postcard. So instead of writing down how they did and giving it to the Marina office, they'll get an automatic email. And this app has helped us simplify the surveying process a lot. So monitoring 159 units 4 times a year, we had to take all that data on paper, and then we'd get back to the office and enter all that data into our database. Now, and that, was a lot of work, and so that helped simplify that. But not only does it save us time, it also helps reduce the chance of error. So when you're entering all that data, sometimes you might make a mistake and enter the wrong number. So by having an app, we don't have to worry about that. It gets entered when we take that data, and then it is correct. It also streamlines the reporting process between the CVA regions. Before, both the Bay Foundation and the San Francisco Estuary Partnership did communicate about how we monitored, and we had similar data sheets, but this app really ensures that we're collecting the exact same data. Some new things that came about was in Southern California, we never looked at the condition of the backflow flaps, so that was a new thing for us. And then in Northern California, they didn't look at the ball valves, so that was new to them. So now we are streamlined and collecting the exact same data. And this app also helps us to connect with our audience. So basically, it has a public facing portion for the boaters and the back end portion for us to do all of our monitoring and reporting. Next slide, please. So first I'll go over the public facing portion. If a boater downloads this app, it geolocates their position and shows them the closest pump outs to them in either a map view, which is on the left, or in the center, that is the list view. As you can see, it shows whether the unit is operational or non-operational, and general information. If you click on one of the pump outs, that image on the right shows what you will get. It shows the status, if there's a porta potty. If we happen to have any specific instructions as to the location of the unit, like if it's on G dock or B dock, we'll add that in here, and that'll be underneath that pump out icon. And then the marina information is there too. And the best part for a boater is that they can actually report a problem directly through this app. So if they ever go to a unit and something's wrong with it, they could press that report a problem button. Next slide, please. And then on the left, that image is what they will see. They can tap on any of the issues that that unit is having. They could take a photo of any of the issues or the unit, whatever they want to take a photo of, and write in a description under details, and then submit that, press the send button, and we will get an email with that notification that will alert us that a problem has been reported. So generally on the app, you'll notice that a lot of the units are either red or green, meaning they're operational or not. If they are orange, that means a problem was reported, and you don't see that quite as often because whenever that happens, we get that automatic email and we determine if that unit is actually non-operational, and in that case we will turn that from orange to red. Or if maybe it is operational, I know one case was that the boater went to it while it was not open. A unit did have specific hours of operation, and they were there later than that unit was open. They thought it wasn't working, but it was. So we changed that back to a green to indicate that that unit is operational. The app also has general information for boaters, how to pump out, why to pump out, information about the CVA maintenance and installation grant, and a video on how to pump out is there as well. Next slide, please. So that is all for the boater, and then for us, we use it while we're out monitoring. To do this, we need to log into the app. All the CVA staff have specific login information. Select the pump out that we want to survey and click the survey button. Next slide, please. We are then prompted to go through 4 different screens to enter all our monitoring data. So the meter readings, the vacuum readings, the 5-gallon bucket test, the condition of all the parts, and the signage. We could also take a photo directly through the app. This is very useful for us while we're in the field. It helps us stay organized, and it allows us to take a photo if there's any broken parts or anything actually very great that that marina is doing. If there's new signage up, we can take a photo there. And under additional information, take any notes that we need to. Here, we will note if we have any recommendations to the marina, like, hey, your nozzle's getting old, it's time to order a new one and replace it soon. We'll add that right there as well. When we press the Submit Survey button, it will submit that survey. Currently, we have access to all that data, but in the next phase of the app, that information will automatically be sent to the marina manager. So once we hit Submit Survey, they will get an email with all the information on how their pump out did. Next slide, please. For us, all the data goes into our administrative platform. This is basically the back end of the app. Here is where we could add new units if new units get installed, or we start monitoring new units, and change contact information. Anything we need to do, we could do right here from this admin platform. It helps us also to generate reports. So when we need to report to our grant manager, or if a marina wants a report on how their unit has done for the past year or 2 years, we could just go to our administrative platform and get all that information right there. So each CVA region has access to their own data. As you see, the operation in the blue box, the operational and total pump outs. This is for Southern California. There's 70 pump outs, not the 159 for the whole state, because we don't need to see the other agencies, the other organizations' pump outs. We just need to see ours. Next slide, please. So all this data is great, and we collect it, and we report to our grant managers, and we can share it with boaters. And we've also developed a pump out report from it. This report aims to answer the question, what is the likelihood a boater will have a positive experience at a given pump out? So we include a lot of information in this report. It's geared towards marina managers and boaters. It has information about the different types of pump outs and the different types of pumps, if it's like a vacuum pump or a diaphragm, or the newest one is the peristaltic pump. And we also make maintenance recommendations in the beginning of the report. And then each geographic area has each of the units listed, and what we did is we analyzed the data to come up with what we call a usability percentage. So we give the boater just one number, a percentage, so on a scale of 0 to 100, to answer that question of what the likelihood is that they will have a positive experience. So You could check the report out, and it goes through our entire methodology there and how we develop that usability percentage and all our recommendations. Next slide. So some next steps, as I already mentioned, soon we will be able to automatically email the Marina office with all their monitoring data. So that is coming up soon. Where currently the app that is available on everyone's phones is the first phase of the app, and we're on the back end developing the second phase of the app, which we expect to be out within the next coming months. And we have plans for additional phases. We want to stay up to date and always make changes and be relevant. So as we come up with new ideas, we will add those into the app. So the automatic emails will be coming soon, as well as the app automatically calculating those usability percentages and different metrics we need to help us with all of our reporting. This app was funded by the Division of Florida and Waterways Clean Vessel Act, and although that does come through a state agency, the funding is actually from the Sport Fish Restoration Fund, and that is federal funding. Some of our partners from other states have expressed a lot of interest in joining the app, so pretty soon we will be expanding. I know Connecticut really wants to get on this app and some other states, so that is part of the next steps as well, is to expand to those different areas. Right now, while we monitor pump outs in our 5-gallon bucket test to time it, we put a dye tablet to make sure that there is no breaks in the hosing and the plumbing that goes back to the onshore system. So we are going to add that to the app as well to see if we did the dye tablet test, we'll be able to check that off, and then any of the results. As of now, we've done the dye tablet test for 2 quarters here in Southern California at approximately 30 of the units, and none of them has had any issues. All their plumbing's been great, which is what we like to see. So it'll be great to have all that data in this app so that while we're out surveying, we can note that and include it in our reports as well. Then in the future, we want to add another feature for boaters so that they could set up an account and actually log every time they pump out. It's something that we encourage boaters to do. If they're going to use their system, they should know when it's close to being full. So having a pump out log is helpful for them. So that's something that down the line we'll look into adding to the app. Next slide. That's pretty much it for the app right now, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
You know how much of the boaters are actually adopting the use of the app?
Oh, that's a great question, and James is on the line, and he might be better suited to answer that question because he has more immediate access to that information.
Yeah, hi everybody. Vicky, great presentation. So we do have download numbers that we recently reported to DBW, and I think so far we have, it looks like, I'm looking at them now, about 411 downloads for one of the apps. So something worth knowing is that in the development process, we started thinking, oh, we're going to create a website and then digest it through, this mobile platform, and then that is going to be our app. We were actually able to get native apps for both the iPhone and the Android. So those downloads are tracked separately, but they're both currently at about 411. Or about 400 downloads each. And that is, actually now that I'm looking at this, it's more than that. Sorry. This is the wrong spreadsheet. But we're getting quite a bit of traffic on this because, especially because DBW has been working with a marketing firm to make voters aware of this. We've been presenting about it. So far so good, but we only launched this in April, so we're expecting definitely those numbers to increase. sometime.
And now everyone here is going to pull out their phone and download the app and check it out. So.
Yeah, actually, James. Hi, this is Vivian. I'm the one of the DBW staff who receives the data from the two grantees, meaning Vicky's and the Estuary Partnership. And Vicky, great presentation. Couple of things that I wanted to mention is both apps have been downloaded over 1,500 times. And one thing that I wanted also to mention is California is, as Vicky already mentioned, the first state that is doing or developed that particular application. But in addition to that, that report that Vicky showed to everybody is also a very unique document because California is, I think, the only state that is currently monitoring the pump outs compared to the rest of the nation. So we're very happy to see how the grantees are working really closely with the marinas and assisting them to keep the pump outs in working conditions, especially the ones that are funded by our division.
So also another thing to note is right now this app, all the units on it are open to the public and we monitor. We're looking to expand to additional units that we don't monitor to include them. So that'll be in the next steps as well.
I have a question behind that. You guys collect hours of operating for each of the units in the survey?
Yeah, the question was if we collect hours of operating time, and that is something that we do collect. It is not used in our pump out report as part of the usability percentage, so it doesn't go into the answering the question, what is the likelihood a boater will have a positive experience when they visit that pump out, but we do collect and use that data.
And I do want to jump in there. I'm sorry.
One moment, James. Sorry, Greg is still talking.
I was wondering how many boats are actually using it as opposed to putting them there. And that's great. You have 5 and 10 of them. Doesn't mean anybody's using them. And if you correlated the information backwards, for example, you know, 4,000 boats, say 10% moving forward, you get an idea of how many pump outs roughly you would have per month. And if you had operating hours, you could correlate one to the other and say, gee, we have a problem here, or folks really using that value out in the right direction, or are they not? Maybe use it as an ability to point out if we're really utilizing it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't know if everyone on the phone heard, but Greg mentioned that we could use those hours of operation and correlate that to see if the boaters in the harbor are utilizing them as they should be. And that's a great idea. It's something that we've considered, although there's more that goes into it because we only monitor the units that are public. There are some units here in the marina that are private, and now several of the marinas have in-slip units as well. So we'd have to take all that into account as well as the mobile pump outs. But it is something we can do, and I think it's something that we're going to be looking at actually this year.
I mean, I'm just saying from a macro perspective.
Yeah.
Because boats can also treat their pump offshore, and that may happen as well in order to different lakes.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, within an older magnitude, is the right ball the boat road. And I see a lot of these things, and I got to tell you, there's a lot of them that don't have a lot of balance.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's just not being enforced. So you know where that's going.
Vicky, could you please repeat because the background noise is really bad, and I think people on the phone couldn't hear what Greg was saying.
Yeah, Greg mentioned that from the boatyard's perspective, he sees a lot of the boats, and a lot of them actually don't have Y valves. So it'd be interesting to look from a more macro perspective at the entire harbor and how many boats there are and how often those units are being utilized to see what that story says.
Okay. One thing that I wanted to clarify and go back to the downloads, the actual total for both iOS and Android has been 1,601 downloads all the way to December 31st. So the contractor that works with the two grantees provides the data on a quarterly basis, and we cannot ask for more because that represents more money. So this data is the total since we started the app all the way to December 31st.
And I just would, hey, so I just really quickly wanted to chime in on the hours of use and follow up on that really quickly. It is something, as we're going through the next phase of development, that we're looking at, because we think that the feds are going to start expecting kind of these indicators of success, and one of those is going to be how much sewage your network has moved through the system, right? And so to calculate that, really the only thing we have are hours of use. Now there's a boatload, pardon the pun, a boatload of pitfalls there in terms of, one boater could use it and, it might take them 10 minutes. Another boater might, talk to someone on the dock and they have the thing running for 30 minutes, even though they may have pumped the same amount of sewage. So it is something that we're looking at, and we're working with other states and also the federal folks to figure out how we can take those hours of usage and turn that into gallons of sewage to move through the system. So it is something we're definitely going to be looking into, because I think there are some interesting stories to be told through that use data. We just haven't quite gotten there yet.
This is Jeannie from the State Water Board, and this is really awesome. Thank you for telling us about it. I just had a question about the pump-out facilities and who maintains them. Is that the marina managers are responsible?
Generally, yeah, whatever station they're at. So the marina manager or the fuel dock. Sometimes they're located at launch ramps, and the port would be responsible for it. Okay. So it varies from one unit to the next.
And you mentioned grant funds for them. Are most of the ports grant funds, or just some of them?
Just some of them, and that's changed. You have the operation and installation grants, and they last for 7 years. So for 7 years, they're required to meet the grant contract and be operational. So a lot of them maybe had been in the past, and then they'd be replaced without the grant fund. So it just depends on the unit.
Just a comment on the grant fund, because we had grant funds maybe 8 years ago, and it was very easy to use. The other ones don't put it in, and it was so difficult to do, so we put the.
Oh, okay.
It would have been like a big huge process.
We'll talk more then, because I'd love to talk to you more about that whole process.
This is Michael from LA County. So I understand you have what's currently in the marina or in Los Angeles area. If a new one comes online, do they need to contact you, or do you have another way to find out that it's been built?
So whenever a new facility gets built through the grant funding, then DBW knows about it, and DBW tells us. However, if a new facility is not funded through DBW, we kind of have to figure it out. So it'd be great if they could contact us. When we first started monitoring, 15 years ago, we had to do our research, and we went to every harbor, and through investigative research, found out where there are units and started monitoring them and talked to them. But we haven't done a comprehensive review like that, so that might actually come up again soon.
And
there
that
are,
is actually
there are private ones out there that we know exist.
Sure.
Some of them just don't want us to monitor them. Others of them, for some reason else or not.
And to piggyback on that, we are planning on doing that inventory again actually this year. So both the Bay Foundation and SFEP are going to be working together to contact all of the marinas and boating facilities in California, which is a pretty big lift, to find out if they have pump outs. And in an effort to expand this app not only to other coastal areas, but also inland as well. Because right now it's, as Vicki said earlier, focused on San Francisco and the 5 southernmost counties in California. So as we expand nationally, we're also going to expand within California, and that effort will be undertaken this year. But in the future, if a marina installs a pump out on the down low, then that's not something we necessarily know about, and we'd need folks to reach out to us to let us know.
This is Mike Hanks. We're going a little bit over half an hour right here, so I think we have time for maybe one more question. Do you have a question right here? No, I thought you raised your hand. Sorry. Do we have maybe one quick question in the room or on the phone?
This is Michelle Bowman. I was just wondering if you, for sort of full service pump out, if you thought about putting contacts for mobile pump outs for boats that aren't as seaworthy.
Yes.
So that information actually is in the app. There's a section that in the information that says don't feel like it, and it lists all the mobile pump outs. As far as being signage at the units, that would be a good idea. Some marinas, like I know Newport Harbor, at every pump out unit, they have a map of where all the other pump out units are, and in Dana Point, they list all the mobile services. So.
Awesome.
Great.
That's great. Thank you, Vicki. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's really great work, you guys.
Thank you.
Now we're going to wrap up before we do our site tour. I just want to thank everybody on the phone and here with us today, and thank Michael Tripp here for allowing LA Beaches and Harbors to host us. Yeah, and thank our reviewers, Vicki, John, Karen, and I've been getting this wrong all day. I'm sorry.
It's like Daniela, but
Aniela.
Yeah.
Thank Aniela for their presentation. I know that there was a little bit of confusion at the beginning of the meeting about what was being shown, and so what I really want to do is send out the PowerPoint presentations as soon as possible after this meeting. Some of them are really large, so you just have to give me a day or two to shrink them down so that they can be easily sent out. I believe the next meeting is probably going to be in Sacramento, but I think that this meeting got a good response in terms of having an on-site meeting, and so I would look forward to maybe doing that maybe next spring after the fall meeting. And so if there's anybody that would want to host or know of a good location, please talk to me or send me a message and tell me if you know of anything or would be interested in doing that. Let's go around. Does anybody have any items that they would like to hear from for future meetings? Or know of nothing that you want to present yourself? No?
People usually don't like to volunteer.
No, yeah. I have a list, and I have a list of people to bug. So if you don't have anything for me, I'll find something.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And also, this meeting, it was kind of obvious that we had more of a bacteria focus, and that was based upon what Michael told us would be the most pertinent to the constituents here at Marina Del Rey. And so if we do have another on-site meeting, I would like to have a meeting that entails a major subject that is of importance to the local area. Okay?
I just have one last thing to say. If you enjoyed any of the treats on the table there, we ask that you consider giving a couple dollars, $1 maybe, just because you don't get reimbursed. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that's goodbye. Thank you, everybody, for signing on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To know.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. You're always welcome here.
The host has left the meeting, so at this time, the meeting will come to an end. Thank you, and goodbye.